What is up, Fanatics? It's 8 p.m. Mountain Time, and that means another episode of Home Theater Fanatics Live. Tonight is episode 155, and we've got a episode that's been in the making for quite a while. Now, I can't decide if Dirac just didn't like me or they just wanted to keep me on the edge of my seat for 6 months, but finally, they are here, and I'm super excited. And so, Jacob from Dirac, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I have, and I know the viewers have as well, because they keep asking. They're like, when are they coming on? When are they coming on? Like, I promise you, when are they coming on? And then they go outside of my house and they have the little signs like, please bring on, where's Jacob? But no, it's so great. Double A's like, finally. So no, people have been really looking forward to you coming on the show to talk about your technology and your products, and the things that you do both for home theater and all these other applications that people, I think, probably won't know about. But maybe to get started, you could tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you do for the company, and then we can kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what is Dirac and what all do they do.
Yeah, let's do that.
Sure.
So I have been with the company for just over 10 years now. I was really super excited to join because the company is located in my hometown. I didn't have to move anywhere.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And, I don't know if this is a common story or not, but I have had an audio interest basically since as long as I can remember. My father did buy a very premium stereo system back in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And he always had music around me growing up, and with good sound too. And since then I was hooked, and it was a lot about the equipment. The music didn't matter much, and having that tactile feel and everything. So I was exposed to that really early, and it stuck with me through my teens. But I never anticipated to get to work with it. So when I found that there is an audio company where I live, I should probably try to get a job there, which I did manage to land. So I was first hired as a research engineer, if I recall the title correctly.
It's so long ago, back in the years.
Yeah. Well, 10 years in software, that is a long time.
That is a long time. It's like multiple lifetimes is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was all good fun. So everything from looking into various signal processing bugs, issues, coming up with new stuff, to writing firmware for various consumer electronic things. Really. But what I love to do the most, and remember, or I didn't say, but back then we were all of 6 people in the company.
Oh, wow.
And in a 6-people company, everyone tends to do everything. So
Sure.
Even if I was a research engineer, I still ended up going to trade shows and whatnot. And that's what I really enjoy doing. I found out. Meeting people, most of the time people that are passionate about audio, knows a lot about audio, ask questions about what we do or could be doing that we are not already doing. Just so much fun, and it's really, really rewarding as well.
Oh no, that's awesome. I think you'll find that a lot of the audience that we have will have a story as far as the audio goes similar to yours, meaning that it's been part of life, and they might have been introduced by their father or our grandfather or our uncle or something, and they kind of grew up with it, and then they find themselves here. They might not have gone into audio as a career, but it's obviously a big hobby and a big strong part of their life. And for me, it's not my career, but man, I'm doing this live stream every week, so it's obviously a big part of my life. But yeah, I think being able to go into that as as your professional career is really fun and really awesome. That's great.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about Dirac itself, right? I think most people have heard the word and the name, but that really doesn't tell the story of everything that the company does. And obviously, we can't get into everything today, right? And most people here, look at the company through the lens of probably home theater, maybe two-channel stuff, just depending, right? Because there are tools out there that you can do two-channel tuning and everything with as well, outside of all the multi-channel stuff. But I do want you to talk a little bit about the other things that you do, because that's not the end of the story.
No, not the start either, actually.
Well, maybe we should go back to the start. That sounds interesting.
Yeah. So the company name Dirac Research, a lot of people tend to ask us where it's coming from. And Dirac is actually the family name of a fairly famous British mathematician and physician called Paul Dirac.
Mm-hmm.
He did, amongst many, many other things, come up with the Dirac delta function, which is an impulse, the perfect impulse,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is required to be able to talk about things like the impulse response. So the founders, back when they founded the company back in 2001, thought that was a good wordplay that alludes to a little bit where we come from, which back then, more than 20 years now, was different to think about audio from a time domain perspective first, before starting to talk about all of these other aspects that are more commonly used in audio. And the researchers, or the founders, were all researchers at Uppsala University of Signal Processing. So there were 6 of them that were doing research into LTE, which became the 4G standard for telecommunication.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they thought that we are coming up with all of these amazing mathematical methods and models that we apply to radio waves. But shouldn't it also be able to apply to audio? And it turns out that was the case. So the intent was really to use very advanced signal processing to improve the performance of transducers in various types of applications.
It's interesting if you think about, what you said, if you roll the clock back, time domain, impulse control, I guess there was a time where that really wasn't, considered, with the different distances of speakers, and when you break the bass out and cross things over, and they might be, half a meter difference, and how does that impact things? And then when you think about reflection and whatnot, yeah, today, companies like yours has made that concern, I don't want to call it trivial, because the concern's not trivial, but for people to be able to manage that, you make that easy.
Yeah, or we'll try to, at least.
Sure.
And like you say, it's not something that people have been thinking about too much historically, or when they do, people tend to talk about phase response.
Sure.
Which is very
same thing,
similar
right?
to the impulse response, but the way you interpret it, and the mindset is a little bit different, even if it is basically the flip side of the same coin.
Sure.
But it's tricky sometimes to understand how the time domain or the phase interacts with other things that are more easy to hear and understand and talk about. It really, really is. But of course, it's critical to the way we perceive audio. What does this actually sound like?
Right. So if that was the beginning, right? So you had these people, they were researchers, and they said, hey, we're working with radio waves. Let's take, our brain power, and let's focus on sound. And they started coming with all the cool stuff. And, fast forward a bit, and now there's a company that's creating all these different products. Would you happen to know what the first commercial application was back in the day?
Yes, actually, I do, because it was also a bit of a surprise to the people that founded the company. So it was founded in 2001, and the first commercial application and the first customer for the company was in 2004, and that was BMW.
Really?
Yeah, So when they founded the company, they were thinking about, well, where can we find transducers? Where could we make a difference? And automotive was certainly on that list. But it was also expected, which is true, that it would be perhaps the most difficult market to penetrate because it's a little bit slower, it's more traditional, or rather, that was perhaps the case back then.
Right, right.
But it was having the right thing and being at the right place at the right time. So the first customer was BMW with a technology that at the time, and this is no coincidence in the rearview mirror, was called Dirac Live, no less.
Right on.
Yeah, and being a small company and having a customer like BMW, well, let's drop everything else and focus on automotive because clearly we have attraction there. And they did. They managed to gather a few customers in the automotive space, and then '07, '08 economic disaster hit, right?
Sure. Yeah. Hard
Which
times.
was, yeah, and especially for automotive manufacturers. So spending money on improving audio was not exactly top of mind. And being an automotive only supplier then was not a lot of fun at all. So it was decided that, okay, let's look at the things we have. What else could we bring to the market fairly easily with that? And two different directions were chosen, where one was room correction,
Hmm.
using the same IP that was used in automotive. And the second one was mobile space. Smartphones did have speakers, not only for the voice call, but also for audio in a sense. But the first use case on the mobile space was actually for headphones.
Sure. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, because back then every phone shipped with a pair of headphones, and of
Hmm.
course it needed to be as cheap as possible. And it turned out to be the case that it's cheaper as a smartphone manufacturer to source some really, really low cost headphones and use signal processing in the smartphone to improve the performance than to source a more premium pair of headphones in the first place and just connect them.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, right? You write the software one time
Mhm.
and rather than producing, 100 million pairs of headphones. Yeah.
Exactly. And the mobile business has since been quite successful. We have worked with a number of top 10 brands in the smartphone industry, like Oppo, Xiaomi, Huawei,
Hmm.
Meizu. Uh, exactly who we are working with at any given time tend to change because it's a fairly fierce competition in the smartphone space. Uh, and since we started out in that space, headphones are no longer a thing, but the need for audio in smartphones is probably bigger than ever. And just looking at these devices, I mean, a typical transducer in a smartphone is maybe 9 by 14 millimeter rectangle,
Hmm.
has a voice coil rated for 180 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that would be in Fahrenheit, but a bunch.
Yeah, it's very hot.
Yes, it's twice almost the boiling temperature of water.
Yeah, it's got to be like 300 and something degrees or something.
Yeah. And the complexity of these tiny transducers is astounding and how difficult they are to manufacture. And of course, good sound means having sound at all in the first place. That's kind of a prerequisite. So having these tiny transducers enduring the punishment they need to take to sound the way they do when you unbox a smartphone today. A very big thing is making sure that voice coils don't burn out, for instance, because that's going to lead to product returns,
Hmm.
which means costs.
Sure.
And of course, all of the traditional things that constitutes good audio. I mean, no one probably who are watching this show or that likes to think of themselves to enjoy great audio will say a smartphone sounds good. But for what they are in terms of a speaker, they do sound amazing.
They really
As
do, and
yeah,
they've made huge strides. I sat down with a new iPad the other day, and a Samsung device as well. And I'm like, man, this is stereo is not bad. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and I mean that's something else. Now that you have two speakers, you can do so much more. And it's similar to when we went from mono to stereo reproduction in hi-fi, for instance. That was something of a revolution. And of course, you had the same in smartphones, but they are so close. So, how do you deal with that in order to give a good sense of stereo reproduction?
right.
Yeah, so the number of technologies that we deploy in the mobile space is probably, well, where we have the biggest toolkit and IPs, if you will, because there are so many different types of challenges to solve.
Right, and the market there is just frankly huge. I mean,
Yeah,
if you think about just the number of people purchasing cell phones versus the number of people purchasing anything else in the consumer electronic space, I mean, everyone has a cell phone. I mean,
yeah,
all over the world too. It's not, it's not just a European and American thing. It's just, it's ubiquitous now.
yeah,
Not everyone has a computer. Not everyone has a television. Not everyone has a car. Not everyone has a home theater. Not everyone's got a stereo.
yeah.
Everybody's got a cell phone.
Yes, indeed.
But,
Yeah, and then basically at the same time, or slightly earlier, we also looked into having a room correction product that got called Dirac Live because it used the same Dirac Live technology as from automotive. And the first customer for that was actually a professional theater processor manufacturer called Datasat.
yeah,
Back,
Datasat. Yeah,
yeah, and back then, I believe they were still a part of DTS before they got spun off.
sure.
And yeah, from there it's history in a sense. And it's no chance that that one was a bit closer to home coming from automotive, because in essence what we do for automotive is like an incredibly complex and advanced room correction system, but you use it in a car instead. There are more
Right.
technologies to choose from. There are many more measurement points, and the people that use the software receive maybe between 2 and 6 weeks of training in order to be able to use it. But
Right.
the overall principle is similar. You measure a number of points in an enclosed space where you have transducers, and as a user you can have various knobs to get the sound you like.
Sure. All about tuning the car. Now,
Yeah.
if you take a look, okay, so the history, you got started, things changed. You introduced your mobile technology, you introduced the in-home room correction, and then you fast forward all the way today. um, you know your company, your brand is arguably the best at correction on the industry. There's some competitors, but um, you know, to my ears, particularly in the certain brands of processors, it's really phenomenal. What your technology is able to do, and I think maybe if we talk a little bit about what is available today in
Hmm.
different types of AVRs and processors out there and what the capabilities are, I think
Hmm.
that's good because not too long ago, base management was fully released, right, as a product, and that's a fairly big game changer. But I don't know that people really understand what that means, and does that come with everything, or is it add on, or how does it work, or where can you find it? So maybe we could talk just a little bit through what the products look like that are available today.
Yeah, let's do that. Maybe we should go through just briefly what room correction is and the problem it tries to address.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we'll cover base control and that stuff and how we think think it fits into the whole bigger picture.
Sure.
Let me see here. I can share.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah,
and while you're doing that, say hi to a few people that are out there. Some of the mainstays are with us. We've got Hi-Fi Haven, we've got MyMail, we've got Double A with us. We have the ubiquitous Facebook user. We don't know who you are because there are a bunch of you out there, but Facebook users are with us tonight. Mad Piranha has joined, a whole bunch. James is with us. Sorry if I didn't call your name out, but thanks so much for joining in. All right, so I've got that slide pulled up. Trying to measure something and decide how to make it better.
Yes, because a room correction product is a curious thing. You have this process where you have a microphone, you place it in one point or maybe in multiple points, you measure the audio system, whatever that may mean, and through automagic, it's supposed to sound better.
Right.
And it's software that is doing this. So clearly the software must have at least an opinion about, in relation to these measurements, what does it mean to sound better? Because otherwise, how could it do the job? Right. It doesn't matter how clever algorithms you have unless you have an answer to what is good sound in relation to measurements. And just as a bit of a mind experiment, if you will, I have this picture where you have two plots. So they are both speakers in the same position, measured in the same position, and they are also in the same room. So there is a red and a blue speaker. And just in our minds then, which one would sound the best out of these two? If we pretend we are a room correction software, we try to solve this problem. Which one is going to sound the best?
Right. Yeah. And, when you look at the graph, there are a lot of things to talk about there. And the question is, which one is better? If you look at the red, once you get down to what's that, 80, 60 or 40 hertz, something like that, you get a huge bump up at about 30 or 25 or something like that. And then a big trough down, what is that, 60 maybe? So, that's significantly variable there. Now, the blue line has a nice curve. It starts rolling off at 100 and rolls down. And, at about 40, it starts dropping off pretty significantly. Now, which one is better? I don't know. There's more bass with the red curve, but is that better? I don't know. And then if you look at the top end, you start getting roll off at 10K on red. Now, if you're 70 years old, you probably don't hear it. It doesn't matter. But, the blues. So, yeah, I mean, red has more. Blue rolls off a little. I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know which one's better.
No, I don't either. And I mean, most people tend to say that the red one will be more fun for all the reasons.
I think it would be more fun. I think, yeah. I think it'll give you more kick in the butt for sure.
Yeah. And some people say that the blue one will be more correct, which may or may not be true. It also highlights one thing that, to me, is one good answer to what good sound is, and that it's subjective. People like different things. That's why there are more than one speaker brand, for instance.
Sure.
So let's not forget that. But it's very difficult to say. We can at least agree with that. And if we now call, for instance, the red speaker, that can be speaker model A from some manufacturer.
Yeah, so let me just call this out. So we have a viewer, and his name is Blue Lines. That's his name. And he likes the red line.
Oh my God.
So Blue Line likes the red line. That's hilarious that his name is Blue Lines. Welcome, Blue Lines. I don't think I've seen you on before, but that's awesome. Anyway, sorry, Jacob. Back to you. I just had to call that out for everybody.
Yeah. So let's assume that the red one, the preferred one by Blue Lines, is called Model A by some manufacturer, and that manufacturer have received market feedback that there is a great demand for a speaker that is similar to Model A that they are already building, but it is different in one very important regard, and it's that it should play everything you put into the speaker backwards. Same as when they played records backwards to find hidden messages.
Sure.
So they output a new speaker that's called Model A Plus. And the question then is, and Model A Plus does play everything backwards, but is the same in all other regards. If you measure that one exactly the same, what would it look like in this plot? And the answer is it's going to look identical.
Yeah.
But clearly we can hear if we play a song or a conversation forwards or backwards. It sounds very different to us. But to this way of doing measurements, it sounds exactly the same because the plots are identical. So clearly there is something in this picture that is not covered that we can hear and potentially has a big impact on the way it's going to sound in the end.
Sure.
And that's, well, what's the difference between playing something forwards and backwards? Well, the content is actually the same, but it's all in the time domain. You don't want the final words of the book first, unless you are the type of person that reads the last chapter first to find out how it ends. But that's not the way it's intended, right?
Yeah, you want first thing first, right?
Exactly. And that is also true in audio. And in a way, you can think about the phase of the system to be that aspect, but it's easier to think about it from a time domain perspective. And that's where people start talking about impulse responses or transient responses. Another example to understand where the time domain makes a difference, and the time domain is not visible in this picture, it says nothing about the time domain.
Right. Would that be a waterfall chart? Well, no, that's decay.
Yeah, but that's also a time property, right?
Sure.
So a waterfall chart is what you build if you have a large number of these plots at different points in time, where the first graph is this one, and all of the consecutive graphs are what happens when you pull the plug from the system, meaning you only hear the room. And if you put those in front of each other, you get a waterfall plot. And that's something that happens over time. So it is a time domain property. But another one that's a bit closer to home is, for instance, if you have a stereo system rather than a mono system, because this plot only shows two single speakers that are different, measured at different times, and they are not playing stereo content. So if you imagine that you sit in your favorite chair, you have unpacked the best audio system in the world, you have maybe a glass of red wine, and everything is just perfect. And in walks your evil twin brother or some other villain and switches the polarity of one of your speakers. What's going to happen to the stereo image?
It won't be nice. That's why he's evil.
Exactly. It's going to totally collapse, but your equipment is still amazing. Your chair is still comfortable. Your room is still perfect. And the track you selected is still the best. So the only thing that changed was the phase response of one of the speakers.
Sure. You're 180 degrees out of phase now.
Yeah. So having good phase coherence between your pair of front speakers is critical to have a good stereo reproduction. And again, that's not something that we can see in this picture at all. And for that reason, we think it's very important to consider the time domain properties when you perform room correction. Because a speaker in a corner versus a speaker, well, on the middle of a wall, for instance, they will interact differently with the room, and that will affect your stereo image.
Sure.
And a third example that is also common, where time domain aspects are critical and at least well known, if not well understood, would be the difference between ported and sealed subwoofers.
Oh, now you're getting into a topic that is heavily debated in circles that I run in.
Yes, where, and you probably know this better than I do because I'm not at all any subwoofer expert, but the general advice perhaps would be that if you want to use your subwoofer for music, go with a ported or a sealed subwoofer because they sound better. But you're gonna get much more bass for the buck if you choose a ported one for the for the same money and the same size too, for that matter.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the general thinking is that, from a ported enclosure, from port tuning it up, right, you get a lot more output. So it's, equal to, a couple of seal subs just from a pure output point of view, right? Of course, underneath port tuning, the driver can unload and you lose control. And then I also believe that you get phase shift underneath port tuning as well. Now, on the seal side of the house, typically it's thought of as being more expensive because for the same amount of output, you need to have more cones or more power or whatever it is. However, you don't have that phase shift issue. Now, one thing that I don't know a lot about is that some people say that ported or bass reflex designs are more linear above port tuning. So I don't know if that is indeed true, but I've had some people call that out. I'm not sure how it could be more linear. I don't know what that really means. But yeah, my advice is always bass reflex is great. Acoustic suspension is great. You just need to look at your application and understand what you're trying to achieve. And then, how much money do you have and go from there. But yeah, very, very different technologies when you get down to port tuning specifically.
Yes. And something that I hear from users sometimes is that sealed subwoofers tend to be thought of as faster or have a more,
faster.
more distinct, which again is a time domain property.
Sure.
And ported on the sealed subwoofer, they do sound different.
They do. Now that I absolutely agree with. A sealed subwoofer does sound different than ported.
Yeah.
And people will say, you're crazy. It sounds the same. I completely disagree.
So those are a few examples of where time domain properties to varying degrees impact the way we perceive sound. So clearly it would make sense to also consider the time domain somehow when you do room correction. And that's something that is fairly unique, I would say, to Dirac Live. I don't know for a fact that anyone else on the market is doing it. I'm not going to talk for our competitors, but it's also difficult to consider these time domain properties because if you don't do it right, it's going to sound really, really bad.
All right. And it's more advanced than just playing a sound through the speaker and recording it and saying, okay, there's 2 milliseconds of delay here and then 3 milliseconds of delay there. Fix it, right? It goes beyond all that.
Yeah, it does, because that's only adjusting for different distances to different speakers. You can talk about time domain properties for a single speaker. Like if you compare a single ported subwoofer to a single vented subwoofer. I mean,
sure.
Then delay isn't a factor because delay is only a thing if you compare two things against each other. So you also have time domain properties for individual output channels.
So is what you're saying then, like on a bass reflex, or I'm sorry, a ported subwoofer, you can actually change the time domain properties as the frequency gets lower underneath port tuning? Are you able to actually correct that type of phase change? That would seem to be really way out there. I mean, that I can't even imagine how you could do something like that. Is that even theoretically possible?
Well, in theory, yes, but of course, below port tuning, that ported subwoofer will have difficulties delivering meaningful amount of output anyways, which is why you see a ported subwoofer dropping off much faster than a sealed one.
Mm-hmm.
So it may or may not be a good idea to do so. And exactly what can be done about the timing properties depends on the exact setup. And the reason why Dirac Live requires more than one measurements, you need to measure in multiple positions, is that you must make sure that the time domain processing that you apply must be valid at all points, because the way our brain and ears work together makes us extremely sensitive to if you mess that up. So you must make sure that it's also spatially robust. So it's difficult to give any sweeping generalization that it will always be able to do this.
Right.
It's going to depend between system and system.
Gotcha. So I think maybe to surface up for people, because there are probably some people out there going, "Oh, God, just tell me what you got." So how does this materialize for consumers? What does it look like from a consumer point of view?
Yeah, exactly. So Dirac Live is a product that was always intended to be licensed to hardware manufacturers like NED or OnQ or any of our other B2B customers.
Sure.
So it's a software that you use. You can use it on your Windows or Mac OS PC. You can also run it from Android and iOS. We do have new apps out in public beta. We can cover that later if we have the time. So on either of these 4 operating systems, you can download and run our software. And that software will try to find your equipment on your network, connect to it. Depending on if you are on a smartphone or a PC, you have a few different microphone options where you can use the one included that connects to your AVR, or if you want to have your very expensive measurement microphone, that's also an option. Then you will do a number of measurements. Exactly how many depends on your setup. If you have just a single chair in your living room, then maybe 3 to 5 measurement points will be enough. Even if more is always better, but with diminishing returns. And of course, if you have 3 rows of seats in a big custom install home theater, then maybe you want to go with 17 points or perhaps even more.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. And once the measurements are done, you get to set something that is called then the target curve. And a target curve is something that all room correction systems have implied or explicitly. Some systems have an internal target curve, and this is what you're gonna get.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah, it is what it is. With Dirac Live, you will get a proposal for something that you will hopefully like. That said, if you don't like it, you can change it to be whatever you like. So you have complete freedom over what the algorithm should strive for, which is where the subjectiveness comes in.
And I assume that there would be some method of having multiple presets, because my wife will tune much differently than I do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that's up to the manufacturers. Most systems these days support having 3 or more filters, but there's really no limit except storage space in your AVR. So you can export how many you like. And of course, you can have different measurement sets for different filters if you want. So you can have one set of measurements that is maybe 15 measurements in your one favorite chair because you want it to be the very best. Right. And then have a second measurement set for when it's Disney time with the family in the whole sofa.
That's fun, and I like that. I like that a lot. Because there are times when you want it to be all about you.
Yeah, exactly. And the way Dirac Live always was, until we introduced base control, was that it will calculate one filter and you can set one target curve for each output channel in the system. And that's not perhaps terribly helpful always. It's easy to understand what it is, but it also puts a lot of responsibility on you as a user when you have a base managed system.
Mm-hmm.
because in that scenario, assume you have a 2.1 system with bookshelf speakers as your mains. You need then to decide on a target for your bookshelf speakers and a target for your one subwoofer, and then do bass management in your receiver maybe.
Right.
But there is no saying what the end result will be, because when you play something on the left input or when you play something on the right input, you will use two speakers to reproduce that signal. And exactly what that sums up to is unknown.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons that we introduced a new feature to Dirac Live that we call Dirac Live Bass Control, which then is a measurement-based bass management system. So it allows you to set the crossover in our software, and it changes the interpretation of the target curve such that in that 2.1 system, you wouldn't set 3 target curves because you have 3 speakers. You would only set 2 target curves, one for the left input and one for the right input. Because in a 2.1, it doesn't matter what the target curve is for your subwoofer. The only thing that matters is what is it going to sound like when I play on the left input? What is it going to sound like when I play on my right input?
Right.
That's what I want. And I don't want to have to think about what's the summation effects in room between my front left and my subwoofer, my front right and my subwoofer. Not to mention the fact that my single subwoofer has a single phase knob, and I can't match it to my left and right at the same time. I only have one knob.
That's true. That's why I tell everybody just to buy 2 subwoofers and run them in stereo.
Yep.
And they're like, no, it doesn't matter. You don't need 2 subs. I'm like, yeah, you do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one reason to use multiples or 2 subs. Another reason to use 2 or even more subwoofers actually is to even out the bass response. We have these room modes, as they are called, which is where you have these standing waves in a room resulting from a speaker playing low frequencies in a room. And then you're going to have points in the room where there is no bass at all, because the direct wave and the reflections in the room cancel each other out.
Right. Yeah. So if you've got, let me see if we can do this one in this wave, right? I can't really show it well, but as they move across each other, when you get here, they cancel flat, right? But when they're like this, they're constructive interference as opposed to deconstructive interference. So that's why as you move through the room, you move through the areas of constructive interference versus deconstructive, and that's also up and down and in all dimensions, right? So you could sit down and it might sound one way, and then you stand up and it sound a different way, but you didn't move left or right or front or back. Yeah,
exactly.
It's extremely complex.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why people tend to add more than one subwoofer, because then if you have 2 of them, you have 2 subwoofers, and both of them will create these patterns, but the patterns will overlay. So just adding more subwoofers tend to ease out this situation, even if it's still random in the sense that just placing 2 subwoofers in the room, and chances are that it's going to be better, but you're certainly not making the most of your investment.
Right.
And for that reason, Dirac Live Bass Control tries to consider the group of all subwoofers and calculate independent sets of gains, delays, and all-pass filters for each of the subwoofers, such that the seat-to-seat variation is minimized.
So let me ask this question, and this just occurred to me. So if you think about this from a mathematics point of view, so if you think about kind of like an integral, right? So area under a curve, right? So as the number of those rectangles becomes infinite, you get the exact area. So in a room, if you could continuously add subwoofers in thinking about room modes, if the number of subwoofers became infinite inside of the room, would that mean that you would have a completely modeless or a single mode throughout the entire room if every point in space was a subwoofer?
Yes, I believe so. And that is published result actually
Is it
from
really?
researchers at Harman. Yes.
Oh, I feel like I'm in good company.
There you go. I think they also concluded that 4 subwoofers is a good
Good enough.
compromise between infinite and
Infinite
zero.
and sub. If you have 4 or infinite, which
Yeah.
are no that yeah that I dub that subwoofer calculus.
Subwoofer calculus 101.
We're doing subwoofer calculus 101 today. I love it. Anyway, sorry, continue on. That was just an interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
I guess it would fix all your problems if every point in space was generating your subwoofer sound.
Yeah. But as most people tend to not have infinite subwoofers, but 2, 3, 4, 5, then it's really helpful to have a room correction system that can make sure that you make the most of these subwoofers.
So people are saying that you need to do a seminar, and I think you do seminars, right?
I do.
This, yeah, for this exact thing.
Yes. For tonight, I have picked just tidbits out of a few different type of seminars that I tend to do. Pre-pandemic, it was usually at various trade shows, but we should probably look into doing those online these days.
Oh, I think that would be very, very popular. And then you can really get into the rabbit hole because you know that the audience is there specifically for that. And just a couple of comments. So, Blue Line says, I think base management Dirac Live is a smart and easy way to go. I would agree with that. I think, the complexity that we're laying out, that we'll continue to lay out, this is a huge help. And if you look at the industry, a number of the more sophisticated manufacturers out there have adopted this, have licensed the technology because it's the good stuff. And Hi-Fi Haven hopes that we have parts 2, 3, and 4 scheduled at some point down the line. But anyway, so getting back into it. So, we're talking Dirac Live, we're talking base management, and talking through the number of measurements that you need, and we were into the number of subwoofers that would be beneficial. And I think then you're going to tell us how Dirac base management can deal with all these multiples.
Yeah, so I mean, it can deal with any number of subwoofers. If you buy a processor that can support 67 subwoofers and you can fit them into your room, Dirac Live will co-optimize them for you. Where co-optimize in this sense means that it will use them to get as even a bass response between different points simultaneously at the same time. And you also don't need to think about target curves for each of your 67 subwoofers. You just set the target curve for each input channel, because that's
challenge
really
accepted. Challenge accepted. 67 subwoofers. It's going to be a video on the YouTube channel.
Go for it.
Dirac Live manage. Is there a processor? I don't think that Storm does 67 channels.
No. You could actually kind of do it with our computer product. I can mention that at the very end.
Okay. You're talking my language. Okay, then, 67 subwoofers.
Yeah. And then you calculate these filters, and at the end, there is a step that we call the filter export. So like we mentioned, you can have multiple different filter settings. Exactly how many depends on the product that you use. Then you just say that I want to store this in filter memory number 2, and then you're done. And that's the whole process of using Dirac Live, regardless of if you use base control or not, because it's all integrated into the same software.
Awesome.
And I think I mentioned that we have these new iOS and Android apps out now in beta. They have been long in coming, but they are finally here. And they are, of course, aimed at everyone, but more than anything else, they are aimed at people who are a bit, who think this may be difficult. We have tried to make it easier to use for these smartphone versions, where the two main improvements both are with regards to the target curve. So historically, the way you set the target curve has been through breakpoints, where you set a number of points in a plot, just like the plot with the red and the blue curve. And you can add or remove points as you like and set the amplitude for each of them. And that is your target curve. We have changed that in the smartphone version to a method where you only have two sliders that controls the two aspects that are most important and that we hope will satisfy the need for at least 90% of users.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if you want full control, then knock yourself out and use the breakpoints because you have much more granular control, but you also need to have a better understanding about how do I use this to achieve what I want. Because looking at the curve and trying to interpret what you hear and then translating that back to how do I change this curve to get what I want, that's not always easy.
Sure. No, that's not easy at all.
So there's then only two controls, where one controls the room gain, if you like, or in other words, how much bass you have in your system. Many people feel that if I have a flat target, you have way too little bass, and that's completely to be expected because speakers in rooms, then you have room gain, and music is being produced by people who listen to speakers in rooms, so it's probably makes sense to have a bit of room gain because that's how the music was produced in the first place. So there is one control only to set the amount of bass in your system. And then the second control sets the tilt of the system.
The tilt.
If you go between,
so yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Tilt.
Yeah.
So tilt is not the same as a high shelf. It's not the same as a treble control.
Mm-hmm.
It's the role of the system. So if you compare different speaker manufacturers, for instance, parts of the characteristics of the speakers comes from the tilt of the system. So if it's going to be completely flat like that, which probably no speaker is, or if it's tilting down like that, and exactly how much.
Right, and you're thinking about like a frequency response graph that we were looking at before, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
So, right. So yeah, like, let me see if I can do. Is it a lot of bass, or is it a lot of treble?
But you can still have a system that is perceived as bright and still have a lot of bass.
Sure.
Whereas a system that has a very sharp tilt towards the higher end is going to come out as sounding dark.
Right.
But you can have a tilt like that and then still have a rise at the low end. Then it's also going to have a lot of bass. So the tilt is a bit about the tonality of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And reducing the ways you can interact to only two controls, we hope will encourage users to try them out. There's only two things I can do here. What happens if I change this one? What happens if I change that one?
That's and you can't mess it up, right?
No, exactly.
Yeah, you're just like, okay, this is where it was set and this is where it's set. I know I can always get back to where I was before, and now I feel safe. Whereas, if you're looking at filter sets and you're like 87 hertz plus 3 decibels delay point.
What does it even mean?
Yeah.
And then the second change is that we added a proper auto target, which translates in this context then to a target curve where we consider the system that you have and we try to preserve the perception of amount of bass such that after room correction you will feel that you have roughly the same amount of bass, but it's going to be redistributed, of course. Because much of the bass that you have in an uncompensated system is due to room mode. It's going to be boomy. You will have big holes in your response where you have no bass at all. But a common, complaint, perhaps let's call it that, is that, I use Dirac Live and now my bass is gone.
Sure. Yeah, I've heard people say that before.
Yeah. So this is basically, okay, but then let's give a proposal for a target curve such that the amount of bass feels like it's roughly the same. And we also try to preserve the tilt of the system so that it's similar to what you had before we applied room correction.
Right.
And then
No, that makes sense.
if you still don't like it, you have these two controls such that you can change them.
Yes, they're like super tone controls. You know, remember in the old day, you'd have a treble and a bass control. So this is the new updated version of that kind of.
Kind of. Kind of, but still totally different. But
but people can think of it as a way they can adjust the sound.
Yeah, exactly. As perceptionally as a user, it's a bit similar.
Interesting. Yeah. So let me ask. Go ahead. Finish up. Yeah.
Yeah, and not everyone has a product that supports using Dirac Live. I just wanted to mention that if you have a PC, you can actually download a free trial, because there is an option to use Dirac Live on your PC where it will apply processing room correction then to any audio that your PC is outputting, either over a headphone jack or an HDMI port for HDMI audio then, or if you have a sound card. So that's a free trial that you can use on your Windows or Mac OS machine. So you can get it either as a virtual sound card, or if you have a DAW or a media player that supports loading audio plugins, you can also use it that way.
Sure. So I think I need to make a video of that for people so they can see, you know, what this looks like, and maybe it'll help embolden them a little bit to try this out on their own. So let me ask you this question. We're getting pretty close on time. We're just about to go over, but so, you know, if people want Dirac Live and Dirac bass management, they can go out and buy Storm, or they can buy Onkyo, or they can buy all the other products. And, you know, I've got let me see, I got a list here of some stuff. So Rotel has it, NAD, not NAD, NAD.
It's close to 20 brands that have
JBL, Focal, Bryston, Arcam, a whole bunch. That's one way to do it. But my question is, though, so just say you've got somebody who has whatever they have, right? And they're like, I would love at least to have, you know, Dirac bass management. Is there a product out there built by someone that could take maybe the subwoofer output off of an AVR, you know, and then, you know, allow them to use your software to tune 2, 3, or 4 subwoofers, something like? Does that exist? Is it possible to bolt that on somehow? Because if it doesn't exist, I think it'd be a really good product to have.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's out there or not. I don't know.
The answer is no, unfortunately, but there is also a good reason for that. Because while you can co-optimize the subwoofers together,
right,
you still need to make sure that they are working well with your full range speakers. Mm-hmm. And the way we do bass management now is as an integrated part of your full range speakers. So unless you also use our room correction, what would it mean to only use our bass management?
I don't know. I think there are a lot of people that would like to be able to do that. I know that it is far from a perfect solution, but man, I think that would, I think you could sell them by the boatloads and maybe not give people the perfect experience.
I guess that you could do something. And in terms of products, I would maybe head over to the Mini DSP website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the viewers was just saying, Malario, he's like, Mini DSP?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly make that kind of product. I don't know that they implement Dirac Live bass control, because just because the system supports Dirac Live, not all of them supports both the room correction part and the bass control part.
Right.
So that depends. So you need to look that up for each product. Okay, what parts of Dirac Live does it actually support?
Right. And just from the number of parts that exist, is it just 2 pieces? So there's Dirac Live, which is all of the room, and then there's bass control, which would typically be an add-on to Live that gives you multi
Yes.
subwoofer bass management.
Yeah, exactly. And the way we try to talk about it is that the product is called Dirac Live, and it will do room correction for you, and it can also do bass control for you optionally.
Gotcha.
But you
Understood.
always need at least a limited version of room correction, because that's where you do the measurements. And then
Yeah,
we reuse those.
Hi-Fi Haven says he's going to the Dirac website after the show, and he's going to go look for the software. I am too.
Yeah, go for it. Go download the trial. And if you have equipment already, try the smartphone betas.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to do a video and get a piece of equipment that will do, to like 2-channel stuff, right? And
Yeah.
do some before and after, and see what that looks like. That would be fun. I think people would like that one. Right on.
And there is actually a surprising number of calibration done on 2-channel systems with Dirac Live. That's the major use case for Dirac Live, actually.
Awesome.
And there are more and more 2-channel products on the market that also supports Dirac Live. So room correction is certainly not limited to home theater applications.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think that a really good application would be, you called out specifically the 2-channel, 2.1, 2 bookshelves and a subwoofer. And, I hate to say it, because it's a little embarrassing, but, I listen to a lot of music and a lot of home theater and a lot of everything, but where I spend most of my time listening to my music is sitting in front of my computer. Now, I've got a nice set of equipment here, but I could use Dirac Live software on my machine and improve even what I have here. So I think a lot of people, that's a great use case for them, because a lot of people work behind their computer, and if they're like, oh, I got some nice speakers, why not, right?
Go for it.
Yeah. And the cost on that is what? $0? Is
well,
that the
free
beta?
trial is free.
Right. Yep. To get in.
But then it is a trial. And I must admit that I don't recall. I think maybe the limited version is like $149.
Oh, yeah. That's, if you're going to drop $1,000 on a pair of
Or
bookshelves.
$199. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But you also need to source a microphone, which is something that you may or may not already have.
Sure. Yeah, I've got like 3 calibrated microphones. Of course, not everybody has that stuff laying around. But anybody out there that's in the Denver area, if you need to borrow one, just let me know. I can help you out. I'm sure there are other people in other places. All right. Jacob, we have gone over a few minutes, and I know you're tired because it's like 4:00 in the morning there and where you're at. So first off, many thanks to you for getting up in the middle of the night to join what's predominantly an American audience. It's worldwide, but predominantly American. So thank you so much for doing that. Everyone's time is valuable, so I really appreciate that you took some time to come and speak with us about your technology. And a lot of people have said, "Oh, we want more. We want more." Trade shows, look for Dirac. Jacob might be there, talking about this more than you ever wanted to hear. So that's always a good way to go. And if there are things that people out there want to hear about, send it to me, and I'll see if I can help you find that information as well to learn about the product. And of course, I'll work on bending their arms to get them back on the show again in some number of months, when it's not too soon, but not too far out there. But again, Jacob, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Awesome. Great. And then everybody else, I think we're just going to go ahead and call it since we're a little bit over tonight. I'll update everyone next week on what's going on with the channel, but keep an eye out for videos. I will be reviewing the lower end Onkyo AVR, not the one with Dirac. I don't have that one. But I can tell you about some different technology, but I'll work on getting my hands on a piece of equipment with this tech and show you guys this a little bit more in depth. So thanks, everybody. See you guys next time. Take care.